Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm your host, Dave Cokerhook. This evening, I have a very special guest. I have a woman named Anita Patel, who's a financial advisor, certified financial advisor, and we're going to be talking about some things that I think are very relevant and important to all of us here. We've had some interesting economic times in the last several years. Over the last even decades, some folks have had some impact on their financial position, and a lot of the baby boomers, myself included, are finding themselves in interesting situations and are not sure what they can or should do in order to get themselves back into a reasonable position. So I asked Anita to join us today to come and talk to me a little bit about this sort of thing. So Anita, I really appreciate your being here. Welcome to Reference Point.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Very cool. So let's talk about this thing a little bit. One of the things that, a lot of people have not saved as much for retirement as maybe they could or should have, or they were doing okay and the economy went south, or one of the busts have caused them to lose some things. And so there's this tendency for people to look for a real quick fix type of a thing somewhere. How do I all of a sudden make $1 million, And how do you fight that kind of a temptation?
Well, clearly it's pretty hard to fight, which is why a lot of people fall for the hype. But, the fact is, if you start to look at it, you start to see a little bit of a trend. I call it like the bubble trend. So we had the tech boom bust.
Yes.
Then we had the real estate boom bust. And now, my guess, I could be wrong, but there might be a gold boom bust.
Oh, that's right, because gold went up way.
Yeah. I mean, remember when it used to be 300 and then suddenly we're 1,000 plus and, and the sky's the limit. So the fact is, we seem to have these happen pretty regularly. If it was that easy to get rich quick, I think we would have seen at least a lot more people succeeding. All it usually does is get people, completely take them off track. It's kind of like getting healthy. The fad diets, we see them all the time, and yet how many of them actually work long term? Same thing is true on the financial side. If it was that easy, we'd all be doing it, and we'd all be, fit, rich, and happy.
It seems so hard to resist the temptation to try one of these things that just, you hope might work, or you read on the internet or whatever,
The only thing I can tell you is it's as bad as a fad diet, that usually they gain back everything that they lost and more. Well, with money, it's kind of the reverse. You lose,
you lose
everything you earned and more.
Or what you want to try to put into it, yeah.
So, it's kind of, it's boring, it's not exciting, the media is not going to play it up, but, the tried and true, save a little bit all the time, save consistently, invest wisely. It's not exciting. Media is not going to be playing it up. They don't sell advertising space by saying, do the same thing your parents and your grandparents told you to do, and it will work.
Right. Well, the boomers, myself, I'm in that generation. I've seen statistics that indicate that a lot of them are not really financially prepared. And this was before the economy went south a couple years ago. The generation had just not planned for that part of their life, and is that true? I mean, had you seen that? Is that an observation that you had?
It's a little scary, but yes. The short answer is yes. The long answer, is that basically, things have changed really quickly, but kind of our behaviors and what we're doing about it hasn't really changed that much until recently. All the studies kept showing people expected to get an old-fashioned pay you monthly until you die pension plan.
Right.
Even though they'd never worked in a job that had one.
Really?
Now that's kind of interesting. Yeah.
So people were thinking that they would find a way to work someplace that would give them a pension till they die, even though they had not had that experience in their career to that point?
That is exactly what I'm saying. That there were actually studies that would show a high number of people talking about this pension that they were going to receive, but it was higher than the number of people that,
that
technically have pensions.
Had qualified for pensions.
And then on top of that, we've seen even the companies that had pensions for decades have gotten rid of them like almost overnight in the last 5-10 years. That suddenly, you're planning for retirement, you're planning to, work your 20, 30 years and get 70 or 80 or even 90% of your pay for the rest of your life. And suddenly you're getting this notice from the HR department that says, we're going to be giving you a lump sum. Good luck with it. it's been nice knowing you, you know, and all of a sudden you're trying to decide if you should be retiring yesterday or not. And unless you're really close to retirement, that's not really an option for most people.
What changed? What caused? Because I remember when I was growing up, my dad worked for the Boeing company, all right, and he had this wonderful pension. My mother worked for a company, Nordstrom, and she had a pension and all that sort of thing. What changed to reach the point where these large corporations that had been doing that had switched gears and stopped doing that?
It's actually the same thing that's making the rest of the financial planning complicated. We started living a lot longer. You know, what happened, you know, in the old days, you know, not that long ago even, people would graduate from high school or college, start working at a company in their even maybe their teens, but definitely in their 20s. Then they'd retire from a company in their 60s. And then they'd live in retirement for about 5 or 10 years. And so a company had, you know, 30, 40 years to pay into retirement for you, and then they paid it out for 5 or 10 years. Now, we go to grad school, we change jobs, this, that, and the other. We might work for a company for 10 or 20 years. Maybe the real crazies work for 30 years at the same job. But then we're going to retire. And we retire at 65, and how many of us know a 90-year-old now?
That's right.
You know, everybody I know knows a 90-year-old now. Hallmark makes more centenarian cards every year, and they must be selling them, because why else would they be making them?
Exactly.
Which means that not only are we have 90-year-olds, but we've got 100-plus-year-olds.
Right.
So retirement is no longer 5 or 10 years. It's 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So we're working less at the same company. We're retiring longer. Companies had to decide, do they pay you to work there, or do they pay you to retire from there? And then add to that the whole instant gratification thing, where in order to get the best employees, they needed to give you the best paycheck up front.
Right.
Because our salaries have gone up huge. You know, I mean, in the 70s, I think my dad had talked about having, you know, he was a professional, he was a chemist, and his job, I think, paid like, I could be wrong, but I swear I remember him saying it was somewhere in like the teens, like 13 or 17,000 or something. But a car cost $2,000 or $3,000 flat.
That's right. Yeah.
So, you know, the scale was completely different. And now, you know, people starting out in a professional field, you know, their first job out of grad school, they're going to be making 6 figures, and then they might be making solid 6 figures as they get closer to retirement. So, you know, companies had to make a switch, had to decide, do they pay you to work there? Do they pay you to retire from there? There's no, you know, it's nothing but math. You know, the math just stopped working.
It didn't add up. So then we now have all of these self-funded things, the 401k plans, the IRAs, and the various other personal option, I don't know exactly what the right term is for these types of plans that you can opt to participate in or not. So has the population, that the folks that no longer have this opportunity from the pension, have they embraced these other possibilities?
Don't know what you'd call embrace. I would say, you know, there are people putting into it. Are they putting into it in the same amounts and numbers that they should be? No, not by and large. I mean, people, you know, really, in order to do it, they needed to be doing the same thing that companies used to do. They need to start as soon as the day you start working, if you start putting away. Yeah, that makes a huge difference. And I would say some of my most successfully retired clients did a lot of things right long before I came into the picture. You know, that they had started saving a little bit here and there in their 20s. And so then when they retired in their 60s, with or without a pension, they had a pretty good, you know, chunk of change saved up.
So, but there's a lot of people aren't that way.
Right.
And a high percentage of the people in the boomer generation who are, what did I read? Was it the start of 2010 that in January 2010, and then every day there's some ridiculous number of people in that generation are turning 65 or something like that. I mean, it's scary to look at it and say, hey, I'm X years old, you know, in my late 50s or whatever, and I don't have the pension plan. I don't have the thing. So what can people do, I guess, is the question. And this is one of the reasons I'm real glad that you and I got a chance to meet and we could talk about this, because I think that a lot of people will look at it and say, oh, forget about it, there's nothing I can do, and they just kind of go into a fear mode and grief mode. But that you shouldn't go there, I guess, right? I mean, that's not the optimum solution is to freak out and to cave.
No, the head in the sand approach, although very popular, doesn't work very well. So, I guess the fact is, if you are able to still be having the conversation about what can I do, chances are there's still something you can do. We live in the Bay Area. If you're not homeless, you probably have some resources and some ability to redirect yourself. And it's changed the whole retirement picture. Yes, once upon a time, we worked, and then we played for a little while, and we died. It was a pretty clear-cut thing. You worked and worked and worked and worked and worked, retired for 5 or 10 years, and then you checked out.
Right.
Now, we work and we kind of take some breaks, and then we do the work and play, I think is what I'm seeing a lot more of. I see people practice retirement a couple of times before they get to it. Where there's going to be more people that are doing side jobs, or they might not work the same hardcore career job that they had for, the last part of, before they hit their retirement age. But I think a lot more people are going to be working stuff, not just because they have to, but because they want to, because you don't want to sit, we're not going to sit in a rocking chair for 20, 30 years.
Right.
If you've been working full blast all this time, you might take 6 months off. You might even take a year off. But at some point, you're going to say, okay, well,
I got to do
that was fun. But now what? Now I've got 20, 30, 40 years to figure out what to do in my life.
So can the economy accommodate? Do you think, in your opinion, we don't have a crystal ball here,
right,
but we got to look at this thing and say, okay, so we're living longer, okay, and so we're going to reach that point where a lot more people are in that pseudo-retirement type of modality. We also have the reality of that there are not as many Gen X and Y and whatever's to take over the roles that all those other people. So, but can we handle that? Can the economy manage and deal with all of this kind of flux?
I mean, I can't tell you for sure, but at the end of the day, we're living longer, so there's people spending money, needing to buy things, needing more services. Somebody's got to keep providing that. And in the short term, we've got smaller generations coming up the pike, but then you got your echo boomers.
That's true.
The boomers had children.
Yeah.
And they had even more children than their parents did, because there were more of them. So, we're going to have people coming up the pike, but just think about, long-term care. That was not a concept that existed before, but if you only live till 75, a lot of the things that we have to deal with didn't kick in.
That's right. That's true.
And now, like I said, I'm sure 90-year-olds. I know 90-year-olds.
Exactly.
It's commonplace. But if you're around that long, not everybody is healthy right up until the last. Most people are going to need more services.
Yeah.
They're going to need more doctors. They're going to need more facilities. They're going to need more people to drive them to and from their venues. It's not going to be necessarily the same jobs.
Right.
But there's going to be something. I mean, we're still spending money up until the day we die.
True enough.
It's even our finances are more complicated than they were. We don't just have a steady paycheck coming from our corporate pension plan. So, there's that whole business around all the money management. There's the fact that we used to have more people that had their houses paid off before they got to retirement.
Right.
Which meant that they weren't dealing with the mortgage companies anymore. Now, all of us are dealing with mortgage companies from the first time we buy a place until, I've got a lot more people that have, mortgages to pay during retirement. They're still refinancing. I mean, there's all these little things that are still in place.
That's real interesting, some of the things you just mentioned, because I hadn't given much thought to that. But that picture of what goes on for an individual at that stage of their life is dramatically different. And so needing to have some type of financial planning and some guidance as to what you can or should do seems to me to make a lot of sense, which I don't think people were thinking about so much 20, 30 years ago. They didn't need to. Yeah. But one of the things that you had mentioned to me, I don't know, whenever it was, a few weeks ago we were talking, had to do with the fact that you have focused some of your practice, you put a lot of attention on trying to assist women who, maybe they're single or now made single, or maybe they're married or whatever, but women in this boomer generation who need to take some level of control over their finances. And you had an interesting story as to why it was that came to mind to you. So would you mind sharing that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things. And yes, I focus on the women over 50, partly because what they do now really impacts them almost more than anybody else, and they don't have a whole lot of time to get it wrong. But in my own world, you know, my father passed away unexpectedly. My mom was a grand 58 years old. You know, she has longevity in her family, so she could be here for a long, long time. And I realized that, you know, that same year we lost family friends, and their wives were only 50 each. Mm-hmm. You know, so there's a lot of women that, you know, are suddenly having to take care of that part of their life more than they ever had to before. Plus, women, you know, I see a lot more of the burden of the parents falls on the daughters. Not always.
That's true.
But, you know, I have more and more clients who have older parents, and, you know, maybe dad took care of everything. Mm-hmm. When dad passes on, mom might be in her 80s. Mm-hmm. It's probably not going to be the ideal time for her to go up the learning curve.
Right.
So I see a lot of the daughters, and some of the sons, but a lot of daughters and daughter-in-laws are picking up the slack and having to not only manage their own lives, which, as you know, it can be challenging
enough as it is, right?
But they also have to make sure that mom is taken care of, you know. So they have even more, just not only for themselves, but for their families. They have to learn even more, and they usually have to learn it under the worst of circumstances. They have to go up the learning curve really quickly under dire conditions. And so that's why I'm really trying to focus on more women. And almost any adult woman alive in America today is at some point going to be in charge of the financial household.
Sure.
Just by the numbers. We don't die in childbirth, so we live longer. Mm-hmm. You know, and, you know, death and divorce, disability, you know, there are exceptions, but by and large, I've seen more of my female clients having to take care of their aging and ailing husbands.
I know what you mean. I mean, I spent a little bit of time in the insurance industry, and the actuarial tables talk about this sort of a thing. So I understand that's the case. And what's interesting to me about this concept, though, is that I don't remember when I was in college or in high school or in that time of my life, that this sort of subject matter was a key subject matter that was talked about and you were educated on when you were at a point where, you know, you actually should know that data. Is that changed any or
not really?
Not really? Good luck.
Not from what I've seen anyway. I don't think so. I mean, I think there's more people that are at least talking about the fact that maybe it should be part of the curriculum, that, you know, in the old days we had our home ec and our shop classes, which still serve a purpose. I mean, I wish I had taken a home ec class because I probably could, you know, sew my hems now as opposed to, you know, asking my mom to do it, you know? So, but the fact is we need to have it because it is more complicated. Once upon a time, you know, if you were only retiring for 5 or 10 years and you had Social Security and a pension,
right,
most of your basics, and you had your house paid off.
Right.
So you had an income coming in that was pretty solid. You had fewer, you know, you had lower expenses. You only had a little bit of a gap to cover, if any.
Right.
And so you'd have your savings, but you're only saving for 5 to 10 years. So you could put it into the bank. You could put it into a couple of bonds.
Yeah.
Didn't have to be very exciting. You could pretty much, you know, go very conservative. But you weren't going to run out of money because you had Social Security and your pension coming in. I mean, now most people will get, most boomers, I should say, are likely to get Social Security. Maybe not as generous as it has been, but they're probably going to get something.
Right.
But the pension plans, you know, we've talked about that. The next wave, right now, the corporate pension plans, we've seen where they've gone. I think the next wave that's going to hit is going to be the government pension plans. You know, the unions and the governments, they're just as woefully underfunded, maybe worse than the corporate ones, because their reporting is a little bit more interesting. And, you know, the difference is that they can call upon the taxpayers to, you know, they can basically ask us to fill their coffers, but even that has a limit.
Right.
At some point, they're going to have to come to the same conclusion as everybody else that it does, you know, the math just doesn't work.
You do workshops and seminars around the Bay Area with people. As you say, you focus a lot on talking to women and things like that. What kind of advice are you able, in general? I mean, when you're sitting down with a client one-on-one, there are very specific things that you can go through and deal with, and, you know, you understand what their circumstances are, et cetera. But in a more generalized environment, what kind of what are the key concepts that people should be thinking about that they're not, that can help them come to grips with the reality?
Well, there's almost 2 questions in there. So like one of the things that I've started doing, which sounds incredibly dull, but it, hey, I'm a nerd, so it's all good for me, but is Social Security. It's one of the only lifetime incomes that people coming up the pike are likely to get right now. Mm-hmm. And there are things that you can do that people might not be aware of, tweaks that you can make right now that can, help them get a couple of extra $100 a month for the rest of
that you can make now while you're still working?
While they're still working, or, as far as when they take the Social Security, there's spousal strategies. If you are married, or in some cases, if you ever were married, there might be benefits that you can take to kind of, improve your odds. You could wait a few more years. So instead of taking it at 66, if you wait to 70, you're going to get, you miss out on those couple of years. But if you're going to live until 95, you're going to want those extra couple of $100 a month.
Sure.
And then there's people that don't even realize that they have benefits they could have gotten. If you're saying that your ex was good for nothing, then maybe this is a chance to find out if maybe he or she was good for something. There are benefits that people don't even realize that they have. So that's one of the areas. It's there. We've paid into the system. We might as well figure out how to get as much of our money back out of it as we can.
That's an interesting point, because a lot of people talk about the fact that, the Social Security system is going broke, it's this, that, or the other thing. But what you're saying is that it currently is in place, and there are nuances about it that I'm sure that most, like 99% of the population, has no clue of some of these nuances.
I'm a financial advisor. I didn't know about them until I studied them.
Wow.
And I had other financial advisors attending my workshops and saying, I didn't know that. Because it's true. I mean, we're always trying to teach each other. The good financial advisors will all say we don't know everything, because we've got to learn, and we are constantly studying. I feel like I'm going to be in school for the rest of my life. But they're not, it's kind of like Medicare. I don't do Medicare. I have a colleague that I go to for all of my, I have no idea what to do with Medicare questions. But, that's the thing. There are things that you can do, little things that you can do that can make a big, longer term difference.
Very cool. So you said when I asked that question, there were 2 parts to it, and that was the first part. What was the second?
So the second part was what kind of more general ideas, what can people sort of look at, was kind of my understanding, that, Social Security is one of the workshops. I've done different things. I'll probably continue to do different things over time, as I see the need crop up. But, some of the really general things are the real basics. Figure out what your expenses are. Budget is a word that scares everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's actually a really useful one, and it doesn't have to be, horrifying. I mean, get a list, print it offline, there's things, and just figure out what your expenses are. And then, figure out what your net worth is. Those are 2 starting places. If you don't know the answers to those.
And that's one of those things that's a little scary for some people. That whole idea, what is my net worth? I mean, I've gone through this exercise personally. And there are times that when I've done that where I said, I don't think I really want to know, because I wish it was here, but I guess the point is, if you don't know where you are, you have no way of figuring out a plan to get where you want to be.
And I can guarantee you, even if you haven't done it, or if you haven't done it, I should say, that you're worrying about it all the time.
Yes.
So it's not like you've gained any sleep and happiness over
just
not
by
looking
ignoring
at
it, right? Yeah.
I kind of think of like The Biggest Loser.
Uh-huh.
These are people that are obviously very overweight.
Right.
It's hurt their health, it's hurt their life, it's hurt their relationships, their self-esteem. There's no missing it. They're worrying about it. A lot of them will laugh it off, but at some point they've come to the realization that they need to do something about it.
Right.
And they make, in a matter of weeks, they start like adding years to the longevity and the quality of their life.
Right.
And it's not easy, and they have a trainer and all the, the equipment. But the fact is, that could be, you could just say, well, it's hopeless.
Right.
I am, obesely overweight, and I might as well just sit down here and die.
And die.
But, that's the same thing we have to do.
I think the analogy is a reasonable analogy, because when you're taking a look at your financial life and your financial health, coming to grips with the reality and then taking some action and then having someone that can coach you through it. That's one of the things that they have. Like you said, they have a trainer. There's a coach. There's somebody that can say, all right, we need to do this, we need to do that, and kind of push you along. This whole area of personal finances is one that's chock full of emotional charge. And I guess if you can just get past that and start speaking with someone who you can find who has your interest at heart, and I think that's the key thing. And you find a good one, somebody who really cares, and then you have some options. You can find options that you would not otherwise have, which I think is pretty cool. So you do these workshops and things, and you do them all over the Bay Area, or actually all the South Bay Area. We're here, and we're doing this show in Mountain View, and it'll be aired in Mountain View and Milpitas, and up as far as down in San Jose, and up as far as San Mateo and stuff like that.
That's pretty much the range of where.
Pretty much the range of Europe, which is cool. So, and I'll let the audience know that if you have any questions about this kind of a topic, send me an email at info@referencepointtv.com, and I'll make sure that information gets to Anita, and so that she can answer those questions if you have them. While I've got you there, folks, also, if you have any other ideas for shows or things like that, send me that information too, because I'm looking to try. One of the things I try to do with my show, Anita, and one of the reasons I'm really glad you were here, or are here, because you still are here, you are here, is that I look to try to find things that I think people need to know about. That information that's going to be useful and actionable that can actually help them in their personal and professional lives. And this is an area that's real significant. We only have a few minutes left in the show, maybe 2 minutes or so. So in that last couple of minutes, what would you suggest, if you were going to suggest something to me, what would you tell me?
I can say, if you haven't been able to get your finance where you need to be on your own, it's probably time to go look for somebody and pick somebody. Think of it like the old days when you picked your physician for life, where people had like all their children, the physician knew the names of all their children, where it was a relationship. Mm-hmm. I joke with my clients, I'm going to know everything about you. I'm going to know more about you than anybody else in your world. You got to pick somebody that you're going to be comfortable sharing your financial dirty laundry with. Because if you only tell them half of the information, they're going to be like a doctor that only knows half of the information. Do you really want a misdiagnosis? I mean, It's not worth it. So, find that person. I mean, the qualifications and stuff are very important, and you need to start asking more. People need to ask more questions. There's lists online of questions to ask to pick a realtor, but it's a lot murkier with picking a financial advisor. So people need to get smart. Ask them what their licenses are. If they can't name them, you need to start, wondering if the only license they have is an insurance license. Then you need to think, well, they're probably qualified to sell you the insurance, but
they may not be qualified to tell you some other things. And I think that's a great comment, and that's probably where we need to end off. The point being, folks, that there are professionals, there are licenses. You're always going to look for the person that's certified to do whatever, whether it's put your new roof on, or like you said, the physician is going to help you. Do the same thing with your financial advisor, but take advantage of the financial advisor. If you don't have one, you should go and do some research and find one. Anita, I really want to thank you for joining me on Reference Point. This has been really great information. I hope the audience has taken some of this to heart, and good luck on your career, and thank you for being here. So ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us tonight. Don't forget to send those emails to info@referencepointtv.com, and we'll see you next time on Reference Point.